Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second part of our little webinar series. It's really nice that so many of you signed up for it. I think we're still waiting for some more persons, but I think overall only 28 signed up in comparison to over 80 last week. But I think last week was more the general introduction, and this week it's also good that we are less persons, so we can be also a bit more interactive. First of all, let me say that we will again record these sessions and put it online afterwards on classx.de/webinars, where you can find all these informations. For data protection, if you don't want to be seen or don't want to be recognized, you can change your name accordingly or keep your screen off. If you don't mind, it's also nice if you turn your screen on, then we can create hopefully a little bit more of an interactive discussion here. For the structure of this webinar, in the first part, I will give a brief introduction on how to run, program or develop experiments here in ClassX. And then we stop the official part and do open-end Q&A sessions for specific questions, any questions that pop up, but still feel free to ask anything that comes up to your mind, also during the first part. I also have to thank Florian, who is here, who you can also see on screen. Florian is also a member of the ClassX team, and he will help me also in answering all your questions. If you have something that is on your mind, you can also put it in the chat, and Florian can also answer in the chat. Good. As I guess most of you have been part of the first webinar, I skipped my presentation, so it's just in a short version. I'm professor at Bard College Berlin. There I am responsible for macroeconomics and math teaching, but for a long time I am developing ClassX since 2012, together with the team from Passau that you can see on the left. There's other people I have to thank who always support these projects. Lioness, which is this little lion symbol that you can see, this is Nottingham based, and people from the US and Umberto from Pupil Fabra, who is also, I saw him somewhere here in the webinar, who with whom I'm developing companion material for the teaching, which I also highlighted in the last session. Good. Then the webinar series, you find all the information on classx.de/webinars. There's the recordings, the slides, and also the transcript of the Q&A from the chat. From the previous workshop, we will put this part 2, develop own experiments, also there. And next week, for those who are interested, we will do the last part of the series. I call it part 1B because it's less about developing experiments, more about running them, especially with a focus on macroeconomics, because both Johann Graf Lambsdorff, who is the chair in Passau, and I are both professors for macroeconomics, so we have a special interest in these type of experiments. And this part 1B will be more about how to run such experiments and give some examples how you can use experiments even in teaching macro, which is not the most common place for experiments at the moment. Good. Focus of the day is how to build own experiments. For those coming late, if you feel free, you can feel free also to turn your camera on if you want to create a bit more interactivity. If not, it's perfectly fine to keep it off. Today is, last week we had a look how to run experiments which are ready-made in ClassX, and today we will have a look on how you can build together your own experiments. And we want to start with a little survey, little quiz that I want to ask you a little bit about your pre-experience that you bring to this. If you have any special tools that you worked with before, And it's also a good way to see what we did last week in how to run experiments. I share the link with you in the chat, so you can click there. You're directly going to ClassX. And I just have two very brief questions. Question number A is, if you have ever used tools like Z3, O3, ClassX, Lioness, or any other type of programming languages. And here the focus is always on developing experiments, not on just running them. And the second question is a brief sentence or brief 2 words or something, what you want to learn today, what your focus is. I just started now. We have 36 people logged in. I'll share the screen here. So as you can see, 22, 24 are logged in now on this screen. It's just a first multiple choice question, and then the text field where you can enter a very brief idea of the expectations that you have, so that we all have common ground, and I know a little bit how deep my explanations have to go and how much I can build on your existing experience with different tools. As you can see from last time, this is again the lecture mode. So this is the screen where we run the experiments, where we start and where we stop them, where we can also start test participants to check how the thing looks like. This was one of the most important features, so that you can see this is the questions that I'm asking you at the moment. And as an experimenter, before I run the experiment, I can always look there and test it in different tabs. And please, for the final one, just be very short, because we will then see a list of all the answers, what your focus is a little bit. Is it programming? Is it just to learning the basics, or just to get a brief idea of what is going on? Okay, while this is running, let me just share this slide with you, which is more a lookup slide rather than informational slide, which contains all the possible resources. So we worked a lot to put everything in the documentation. The documentation is very, very extensive, has different subchapters. If you miss something there, always feel free to highlight this to us. The second thing that we have is the help and discussion forum. It's a Google group where you can put questions and answers. And the third thing that you can always, that I will also show you in a minute, is that you can copy existing experiments and learn a lot just by copying and adapting those ready-made experiments in ClassX. So these are the main sources that we have and that you can always use to look up things again. I just may take a brief look with you together in documentation. So ClassX.de documentation opens this website showing the documentation. If you're more the person type who wants to read things in a PDF, you can also do that. You can download the whole documentation also as a PDF. Here on the left-hand side, you can see the different sub-chapters. So one is, okay, that's the thing that we covered in the first part, getting started with ClassX, run ready-made experiments, organize the games. So if you have a lot of games, you may put them in different folders. And then the interesting part for the things that we cover today is develop your own games. There's a little tutorial where you find really a click-by-click instruction how to develop a simple ultimatum game. Then there's an extensive documentation how to develop your own games. And then you find description of all the elements that we have in ClassX, the programming, so all the code snippets and all the language issues that you can find there. So you find all the important information in ClassX. Okay, let's go back to our little survey, which I stop now. So, okay, so we have 50% of the people, that's already quite something, have worked with the standard or one of the standards in experimental economics, which is SETRI, but which is not usable or hard to use online. Okay, 25% have worked with O3. Some people know a little bit about HTML, PHP, but that's not really a problem. That's something that is very well documented on the internet. Okay, let's see a little bit what the expectations are. So creating in-class experiments for master level courses, switching from pen paper, customized standard games, programming with ClassX, programming on experiments. That's all things that we're going to cover. As you will see, I always use the term develop on experiments because we will see in a minute there's a back end, so you don't have to program everything from scratch, but you can use a lot of pre-customized elements for doing so. Okay, good. One thing, SETRI, for those who don't know it, was developed by Urs Fischbacher, and what is still the common standard if you run lab experiments. It consists of 2 exe files that you have to execute on 2 different computers, and then you can run those experiments. So it's really hard to use SETRI on the web. What we took from SETRI, and also I think it's an important feature, is many concepts are very similar. So the concept of a stage that we will see in a minute, the concept of these global and subject tables, these are all things which are made in a similar way as in SETRI in order to help a lot of people who know SETRI, like the terms for those people will hopefully look very familiar. Okay. Just some very brief words on the architecture of ClassX. So ClassX runs on a centralized server, and all the participants connect with smartphones or with their computers, their notebooks. ClassX is all built on these programming languages. PHP is something that you can use to do calculations in ClassX. SQL is the database behind ClassX. That's something that you will never need when you develop your own games. What you will need is HTML, because HTML is used for the text boxes. CSS is something which is connected to HTML, which you can use, but it's not strictly necessary. And if you want to have more interactive input screens, you can also add some JavaScript, but that's something which most of the time you won't need. So the main focus is, if you know, HTML is very nice because it's very powerful. You can include videos, pictures, audios, whatever you want. And PHP is a very simple and standard programming language used for most for most websites on the internet, and is therefore well documented and available. It's a centralized architecture. That means you will program the games and develop the games on the central server. And this is a very nice feature because you can learn from others. You can copy experiments from others. You can copy pre-existing experiments. You can share your experiment with your co-authors, for example. And this is all achieved via the centralized architecture. In addition, you don't have to set up your own server. You don't have to download anything, which all is made in a way that starting with this should be very, very easy and very with a very low burden. The only personal data, that's always an important thing to mention, is anonymized IPs that are collected by ClassX. They are hashed in a way that you cannot read them anymore. They are still stored, so you can distinguish if people came from the same IP address, but you cannot tell what the IP address was. This was done in order to assure all the data protection regulations that we have in the European Union, that if you collect personal data, then you have to make sure that your participants agree to that and that they know of the purpose of this collection. But Classics itself, standard setting is that it doesn't collect any personal data. Another important thing is that we try to achieve is, as you can use it also with mobile phones and in very crowded places, it may be the case that the data connection may be a problem. So we really try to reduce the traffic between the clients, so the devices of the participants and the server. Our most dramatic example of such data traffic was when we were running the experiment of Classics in a beer garden in 2014 during the World Soccer Cup, with thousands of people there, which in the halftime of the soccer game, write messages, call people, and so on. And during this halftime break, we also conducted our experiment, and even under these very extreme circumstances, it worked a lot. Another thing that may pop up, that's why it's also important to highlight this minimized data traffic, is an experience that we had with school children. If they are asked to use their own mobile connection, they will always ask, yeah, but how much traffic does it cost me? Because most of, especially among school children, they have a limited amount of data traffic that they can use. So they are very cautious on not using it and not using it in a too extensive way. So this is also, it's somewhere in the area 100 to 200 kilobytes, something very, very small, if you play it for a long time. And the same thing is it has a very standardized layout. The layout automatically adapts to the screen size, which is a common feature nowadays of most websites, but it's in Classics almost from the beginning that this is a feature that we have. You can very easily access it. We discussed it last time, and you can also pay real payoffs if you want very easily. The game structure, and this is kind of a little bit of pre-information before we start looking into Classics directly. So we have the concept of a game. A game is then subdivided into stages. This is a concept which you can also find in Settree and in many other softwares. A stage, you can think of a stage as a screen most of the time. There's also a more advanced definition of a stage, which would be a synchronization point. So a stage is normally something that you have to finish until you can start the next stage. But I think to start with, the best definition is just a stage is a screen. A typical experiment has, I don't know, 1 or 2 input stages, depending on the design of the game, and then your result stage if you program a very simple game. As a developer of such a game, you have to define those stages, and you have to define those stages for the participant and for the experimenter. That's something which is a little bit different than other experimental softwares, that it's not only that you build the screens of the participant, but you can also build the screens of the experimenter. For the experimenter, the screen consists mainly of things like start buttons that you start the games, kind of forwarding mechanisms, and then also you can customize all the results that you want to see on the lecturer's screen. You can also then, that's why we have these little figures with the roles here, you can then also assign different roles, different treatments during the game and show certain elements only for certain participants. So the structure is always this: you have a game. A game consists of several stages, and these stages consist of several elements. And these elements are then used to customize your whole game. What types of elements do we have? So we have 4 big categories. One is output, one is input, one is control, and one is calculations. For output, the main thing that you will use is text boxes, where you can output some content. You can output simple text, you can output HTML, pictures, videos, audios, whatever you want. And you can also output variables. So things that you calculated somewhere, you can output them in a text box. For the lecturer, you have also different output formats for different types of results. So I just named some of them. One is a histogram, a pie chart, a line chart, a matrix, something like the list of answers that we just saw in the little questionnaire that I gave you. So there's these different types, and you can also design your own result types if you want. On the input side, the focus is on the participant. The lecturer can also make choices. This is sometimes useful when you, I don't know, you think about a decision that has to be brought in exogenously by the instructor. For example, what we use it, for example, in a scenario where students can volunteer by raising their hands, and then the lecturer can choose which student to make for example, the monopolist in a trading game. This is where we use the discrete choice for the lecturer, but it's mainly for the participant. For the participant, you can have these discrete choices. So most of the time, this is realized with simple buttons that people can click on. Numeric input fields, text input fields, slider and radio lines. And a special thing that you use that you can use for trading games is contracts that people can conclude with each other. That's most of the most important things on the input side. On the control side, control means you have to control the flow of the game. So the lecturer has several options how he wants the game to flow. One is the so-called start buttons, that the lecturer clicks a button and this starts the stage. The alternative, an automatic start. Automatic start is more the thing that people may know from set tree, that if you finish a stage, then you automatically are directed to the next stage. As we are here sometimes in the classroom environment, we also often have these start buttons and also maybe an end button. So as a lecturer, you can really be flexible when you start and when you stop a game. Last thing, calculations. These are these little code snippets where you can do a little bit of calculations. Very simple payoff calculations, for example, that you say based on different decisions, you calculate what the respective payoff is, to more complicated things like showing different information, calculating information, or calculating values based on different conditions and so on. Additionally, you can use JavaScript, but this is mainly really for having interactive screens which react in real time to inputs of participants. On the lecturer side, you can also do some calculations. That's the so-called globals programs. These global programs mean that they are executed once for all participants. Subject programs means that they're executed for each subject. So for example, if you have a general calculation which says, I don't know, for each participant, the number of participants times 5 has to be calculated. That's, for example, a calculation that we use in a fishing pond game. Then that's something that you would do on the global side, because you would say, that's a fixed number, which is the same for all participants. So I will do it on the global side. On the subject side, I will do all these personal calculations. For example, I have made several decisions, and then I want to calculate what is my payoff. So this is a little bit of an overview over the most prominent and the most important elements. And we will now go directly into ClassX to see how you can use this. And then we will start by clicking together our own first game. Okay, so as a lecturer, most of the time I'm in this so-called lecture mode, running my games. Here in the top right, you can see 3 different symbols. There's a 4th symbol, which is only used for administration, which you will not see. 3 different symbols where you can jump between the different modes that we have, different screens. So first one is so-called overview. In the overview, you see all your games, and these games are organized in folders. If you have many of them, so for example, I have my folders for my different courses at Bard College Berlin. And down here, that's normally, if you start with your account, you see a long list of ready-made games. So just to mention some, for example, last week we played a game from the macroeconomics folder, which was called Coordination Game Investment. And here you see a little description of the game, and you can play and view the games, which always brings you, play means it brings you to the lecture mode, and view means it brings you to the so-called editing mode. The editing mode is the third of these three sites, is the one where you click together the games. So normally, if you design a game, you will always jump back and forth between the editing mode and the lecture mode. So you program a game, change something, and then you directly go to the lecture mode, you open a test player, and you test the game. This is the main workflow that you will have. There's no need. This overview is something that you may need if you want to organize a lot of games that you have, but normally you will not need it. Last thing, just to mention it, there's your name, and there you can also change your personal data and your course data if needed. For example, the language of your account. If you have multiple accounts, you see my accounts, the number is a bit exploding. Maybe I should reduce them at some point. You can switch to different accounts that you have. And down here, you find also links to the documentation, to the help and discussion forum that I mentioned, and to the terms of use. Okay, let's go to the editing mode. And here in the editing mode, in the menu, you see you can select games. There's some game settings that you can do. You can copy games, create new games, and you can set your parameters. If you click on New Game, then ClassX will ask you for some input, and the most important thing is the name of the game. The name is important because it always helps you to find your game. So always I would give it a very speaking name. Some people also use it and give it a version. So they maybe write, I don't know, first game, my first game, version 1.0. Oh, then if I do multiple copies of it, I can just increase the version number. You can provide an alternative title. That's not very important, but what you can later do if the game is finished, you can provide keywords, comments, and credentials. That's especially useful if you want to share the game with others, that other people understand what the game is about, and that they can get an idea what is behind the game. You can choose the language. ClassX at the moment allows for 2 languages. This language thing is only at the moment German, English, and Spanish, but you always feel free to just check a language out, and then you can also use a different language there. This English, German, Spanish is only saying that if you turn such a language on, all the remaining texts, all the automatic texts that ClassX provide are also translated in this language. And at the moment, we have these automatic texts only in these 3 languages. That's why we have it. If you need an adjustment, you can, with some programming effort, can also change everything. And another important thing is the availability, which you can set to private, public, or you can say, I want the data private, but the game public. As you know from last week, in ClassX, you always see the results of previous sessions of the game. If you want to disable this, you just select this last option. This keeps your session data private, but you can still share the game with other people. They can use it, but you don't share the data with them. The only thing that you really have to enter if you come here the first time is the name of the game. That's the only thing. You save, and then ClassX opens the new game. And you can directly start working on it. The most important structural feature is here, these tabs with the stages. Again, for those who know Setri a lot, these stages are normally ordered one after the other. The difference in ClassX is they're ordered from left to right. You can click on these stages and jump between them. And in each stage, as I told you, you have to define the elements for the participants. This is this thing on the left. And you can define the elements for the lecturer. Adding new elements is also quite easy. You always find here on top, you can find the selection menu where you can where you see all these elements. So I just mentioned them. For input element, contract, calculation is something that we talked about, the program code, the JavaScript programs, or for output, for example, the text box. So you find them all there. The same for the lecturer. So for the lecturer, you can go here, click on Add New Element, and you will find also the text box. Contract table is a table which shows all the contracts for the lecturer. The control thing, start button, automatic start, calculation methods, input field, which I told you about, and also the display of results. So the Likert scale, line chart, single multiple choice, pie chart, histogram, matrix, bubble chart, counter. So I didn't name all of these things on the slide, but you see there's a variety of result elements. If you start a new game, it always comes with a very standard setting. So this is always a very standard multiple choice question setting. What you can always do at any point in time is you can always test your game. So you can always jump to the lecture mode by using these little symbols here. Select the game, and then here you find it, my first game version 1.0. And you can directly see there's already something there. You can start it and look at the test player, and you will see how this game looks like. It looks very boring at the moment. It just has a lot of fillers, and you can just make a decision, and this decision is stored. That's all what is there. This is for standard multiple choice questions. And you can go back to the lecturer, display the results, and you already have a working game. If you're happy with multiple choice questions, you can just use this, adapt all the texts in a way that you want, and you are done. What are these elements? So we just saw the game, how it looks like. So on the lecturer side, you see here there's a start button. This is needed, that lecturers for each stage, that's something that you can remember like this. For each stage, you need to define how the stage is started. Here, for example, I say I want this stage to be started with a start button. I could also say this should be automatically started. On the left-hand side, I see there is an input element. Let's make it a bit bigger, that it's easier to see. So there's an input element, and there's the type of input field that we have here is buttons. And buttons is this type of discrete choices that we saw. With every input field, you always have to define a variable name. Why? Because later on you can retrieve the value that you stored here and use it, for example, for calculations. So ClassX provides some automatic name, but you can change anything to anything that you want. Only thing to keep in mind, variable names, there should be no spaces and no special signs that you should not use. You can always, there should be always like, you can use speaking words, for example, decision or my decision, but you should try to avoid spaces. And another thing is you see here this $sign, and dollar in PHP always means a variable. So if you want to speak to a variable, it's always $my decision. So this dollar is always an indication for a variable. Then you see, okay, here's the text that of the question. So for example, how is the weather today? Or whatever you want to ask. Another important thing is ClassX automatically saves everything while you do things. You can always see it by this screen is blinking green. Okay, this little green symbol is this is not a part of ClassX. It's a plugin that I just disable. So that has nothing to do with ClassX. But if I click here and I click somewhere else, it blinks green, and this means the thing has been saved. If you say I'm not very familiar with HTML, what you always, so in these boxes, you can also use, for example, HTML and say I want, I don't know, a BR, that's a line break. and then I just add some more text. So I can use any type of HTML there, save it. Or if I say I'm a bit lazy, I can double click on it and it opens an HTML editor. So you can also do all these things with the editor. For example, I don't know, I want this just gas. I want it in a different color. So now it's blue. And all these kind of things that I can adjust. And I can close the editor and you see then it's transferred into plain HTML, which you can manipulate. So this is the main feature of these text fields. These text fields has a lot of options that you can populate. You normally don't have to touch them. You can give defaults, say if the field is required, switch the order of options. And then here you can specify these 4 options. You can add more options. So sunny, rainy, cloudy. I don't have a window. Something like that. Important to this is also here the text, and there's of a certain value. This is the value which is then stored in the variable here. The variable my decision is then stores the value 1, 2, 3, 4 for these different types of options. If you're very like data savvy and data savvy, or like you know how all these data analysis goes. For example, it's always nice to code 0 no and 1 yes, then you can directly throw it into regression or something like this. So this is why we have flexibility with the values. That's something that you may need for quizzes. You can also add if an option is correct or not. And down there you find a lot of so-called additional settings where you can change almost everything that you want. So this is customizing the input field. Start button I already told you about. There's nothing that you have to change. You can just change the label. And on the second stage, you find, first of all, nothing on the side for the participant. So there's no feedback for the participant. And here you find a results single multiple choice. So you find, and you can just choose the variable that we just programmed, my decision. That's the variable that I want to analyze. And it's from a result from a single or multiple choice question that I want to see in a minute. So this is already all that I have to do. I switch back to the lecture mode. I start the game. And if you have your screen still open, you're still part of my account. So you should now obviously be able to see the question. How is the weather today? You see just gas in blue. You see the options. So here it's a bit rainy, snowy. Oh, and the thing has been stored. As you see, all these text, where, for example, your decision has been stored, please wait until all participants have made the decisions, are all standard text which are provided by ClassX. Okay, and you can go back. Nice, some of you participated. Again, you say, okay, display results, and then we can get an idea how the weather is around the world at the moment. Luckily, every one of us has a window to check the weather conditions. But you see, this is like an easy way to customize those games. No, and then if you say I want to change something, you just jump back to the game, do some little changes here. For example, let's add some feedback. So let's go to the second stage, add a text box. Oh, and say, hey, thanks for your response. Then the participant will now, if we do the game again, see this little field. So this is like the first thing that you can do. This is very standard to all these type of survey software that you know. There's a lot of things that you can adjust, a lot of things that you can change, but there's only one feature that you really have to remember. And there's always this little info button here. So each element, to make it a bit bigger, each element has this little info button here. And this is the most useful feature, even if it's very often overlooked, because if you click on that, it opens the documentation exactly in that place which talks about how to customize those elements. So for example, I clicked on a text box. It tells me, okay, this is a text box. It tells me what I can do with a text box with all the, for example, special characters that I can use and many, many other things. Or let me go back. I don't know, for example, I want to know what all this customization of this result single multiple choice means. I just click here, info button, and then it tells me, all right, that's result single multiple choice questions. It shows me how this looks later on on the lecturer screen. And then it tells me what all these settings that can be changed. So this is very useful. If you find there's always a lot of settings, you can always assume that they have like a chosen default value, which you can just leave like that. But if you are curious what it does, you can always play a little bit around with that. Okay, so that's these elements. Then some words on these little symbols that you can find here. So up here in this first row, you can see there's a lot of things to move the stage. This is these little arrows which point to the left and right. So if you want to switch stages, you can move. For example, I want to change stage 1 and 2. Now stage 1 is the old stage 2 and vice versa, or I can just switch back by clicking here. Then I have re-established my order. I can also copy stages. There's this little copy symbol. So I click on copy stage, and then I can decide where I want to paste the stage. So for example, if I want to paste it at the very end after stage 2, here's now a little paste symbol, and I can also undo the copying. So if I want to paste it, I just click here, and now I have third stage, which is just a copy, as you can see, of the second stage. So here's stage 2 and stage 3. They are completely identical. I can delete the stage, and I can also add new stages with this plus symbol or with this plus symbol. If you, that's another note of caution, if you delete something, then it's gone. So be very careful if you delete complete stages, things like that. So classics, in the end, the reason for all of this is if you would saving and also deletion is always carried out instantaneously, so that you don't have to click a button to confirm something. Everything is, you can change everything on the fly, which has this little risk of that sometimes you may delete a small piece that you don't have to reestablish, but overall it's very flexible. You don't need to click all the time on save and restore and things like that. The only difference is if you delete by accident a complete game, that's something that we can always restore. Then just write an email to us, and we keep those games for 30 days, and then you can always restore it. So if you delete a complete game by accident, that's never a problem. Then here you have some general settings for the stage. So sometimes you can give it a name. If you have many stages, it's always good to keep it in mind. You also see the name here, which stage it is. You can decide if people should be allowed to arrive late in this stage. Normally, you want people that they can only arrive late in the first stage. So you start a game, everyone is in the first stage, and all the participants can enter this stage. But then when you move on in the game, you don't want to allow this, because normally all these decisions that you make are based then on previous decisions, and late arrivals is always a problem. If you have a game where this doesn't matter and you can be very open, very flexible, you can also allow it. That's why we have it. And the other thing that you can have here is rounds. And rounds is just repetitions of the same. So you can call them also loops. And these rounds are always defined where you want to jump somewhere. So you can say, I want to go back, for example, to stage 1. And I want to do this 3 times. 3 times back means we have 4 rounds. No, we do it 1 time, the stage 1, and then we do it another 3 times. I go 3 times back to stage 1. That's a little bit the thing that you have to remember. If you update this site, this is this little update symbol that you can click, or if you come back into the editing mode, you will see now this arrow here saying you have 4 rounds. So we say we go 3 times back to the stage 1. So we now repeat this stage for 4 rounds. You can do this also over multiple stages, and then also always repeat a certain number of stages. These loops, so normally you should define only 1 loop. There is some very special advanced cases where you can also define multiple loops, but the best way is always to do 1 loop. Again, for the people who have some experience with Setri, in Setri you have the periods that you can define, so you can run through the game multiple times, but you always have to go through the whole game. Here you can also, for example, decide I only want to do the stages 2 to 4 and not repeating all the stages. That's the main difference to Setri here. And for the elements, the last technical thing here is you can also copy elements. It's a little copy symbol. You can paste them or you can cut them and paste them somewhere else. You can delete them. And these little glasses here, you can open this. This is the display conditions. So if you want to display certain elements only to certain people, you can display it here. Okay, so that's the main basic feature that you will need. Oh, and here in the game menu, you can always change your game settings, like the title and all these things. You can copy the game. You can delete the game. And you can also create new games. The reason why delete game is a shaded gray here and you cannot click on it is because it's still running in the lecture mode. So as long as a game is running in the lecture mode here, you cannot delete it, because otherwise there would be no game running in the lecture mode anymore. So that we can restart our game. And now if we test our game, we just added these rounds. You can see now that if I go to the test player, we have again still our old question, rainy. But now I can start it multiple times because I added these rounds. So I started again, second round, get the same question again, can answer it. So you can play certain games over several rounds. Round 3, and you can also, you see if I'm very fast, I can also just jump rounds that no one has the chance to answer. And at the end, I can again display the results of these questions. So I can always just go back and forth, test and click and test and click. It's always, I think there was a question in the chat with if you can run it as an instructor and as participant. That's the thing that I'm trying to always show here with this test players. So you can open here with test participant, you can open a lot of test players if you want. You can open, I don't know, 4 test players, and now you can test everything what you're doing directly. I would always keep the lecture and the editing mode in one tab, because then you can always here jump back and forth between them by clicking on these 2 symbols. And then you can always look what does it do to the test players. As you see now, I started these test players while the current game was running. And before, when I was doing the settings, I was setting this to that you cannot arrive late in the game. And that's the standard message that's shown to people, that they cannot arrive late. Okay, let's do a very brief jump to the slides. I will wrap up some more things, and then we will start the more interactive part where you can then try to develop your own games, and I will also show you some more advanced features. Okay, that's something I had. There's almost philosophical discussion how many stages you should have in a game. But for the moment, that's just for advanced use. 1 stage is 1 screen. All these games are connected to your accounts. So you can these games are always linked to one of the accounts, but you can also share it with other accounts. Then if you run a game, if you have normally an experimental language, you would say this is a session. In classics, this is called a run. So you take certain account and you start a game. This creates a run of the game. And under this run ID, you can identify all the sessions that you played. What is stored? First of all, there's data about the player that are connected. So there are certain players in this run which where the data is stored. Then we have, as I told you, the global variables. So these variables that are calculated for everyone in the game. And we have the subject variables. Those are the variables that are collected for each player. So the global variables, I store them once for each session, for each run that I do. The subject variables, if I have 500 participants, there's 500 subject variables written for each participant. Contracts is something that players can do with each other. That's something for more advanced. But that's the main idea of data model is a bit a hard term to keep in mind. I will show you in a minute how we do these decisions and how we can work with these variables. But the important thing is they are always stored. Decisions are always stored in the so-called subject variables. And the nice feature is you can use them throughout the whole game. So if you ask for a variable in stage 1, you can use it in stage 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or at any stage you want. As I said, variables are always started with the $sign. If you use these variables in text boxes, you have to put the point with the comma at the end. If you put a variable name between the $sign and the point comma, then you can always be sure that Classics reads the variable name and puts the respective value instead of that name. You can have program elements that you can modify these variables. And importantly, decisions are stored always automatically. If you have other variables that you want to store, calculation variables that you want to store along the way, there's also a certain command which is called save variable. So the important thing to keep in mind, decisions are always stored automatically. Global variables are always stored automatically. If you want to store something else, which maybe later become important, you have to use the command save. Reason for this is if you have 500 subjects and you collect all the data, it becomes very, very big. So your Classics only stores the necessary data. If you have more, you can customize it. Then there is a certain type of player IDs. And you see already with the variable sign that I put here, the $sign, there's 3 different types. So Classics has in Classics this unique player ID, which you can, is the same if you are logged in as a participant. So if you play 5 games in a row, you will always have the same internal unique player ID. This player ID is stored in a little cookie in the browser, and the user can always access it by, as long as the user uses this browser and does not clean the cookies, it is always access to this variable. We also have a subject ID, which is unique in the game. So it starts from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you need this for some reasons. And for research reasons, you have also an external ID that you can provide at login or via the URL that you can add at the end. It's called ticket, that you can identify a player. For example, if you work with Prolific or Amazon MTurk, then you normally get this little ticket from these service providers. You throw it into Classics, and in the end, you throw it out of Classics when you go back to Prolific or to Amazon MTurk. So this is for if you, for example, want tokens to identify each participant, then you can use these things. Last thing before we jump back, there's also something which is matching. So matching is we can now start putting people in groups and assign them roles or also assign them treatments. As Classics is mainly designed for running in the field or in the classroom, this is done on the fly. This is a bit untypical in comparison to the lab. In the lab, you know there's 20 participants. They all sit there. You know how many you can expect, and you can program it accordingly. In Classics, you never know how many people will be there. So this matching is done on the fly, always on a first come, first served base. So the first is, for example, the red, then comes the green, then comes the red, then comes the green. And it's always done in the first stage of the game. this brings some importance to this very first stage. So even if you, for example, have a game where you want to just jump the first stage and go to later stages of the game, always make sure that the first stage is open long enough that everyone gets a role, a treatment, or a group. And then that you can continue accordingly. So the first stage of the game has quite an importance here. Okay, let's go directly to where the matching is done. I think I just saw that there's also some questions related to that. So I go back here now to the editing mode. And here you see a first tab before all stages is called assignment and matching. So assignment, there's different options that you can choose. You can put people in treatments, role in groups, treatment and role and group. And the most general one is just complex, it's called complex assignment, but that's the one that I would always prefer, where you can just choose anything that you want. So you can decide that you want to do partner or random matching. So partner means if you play several rounds of the game, same people always play together. If you do random matching, they are randomly rematched. And you see, you can now choose numbers of treatments. Let's do 1. Let's do 2 roles. And then you can make a group size of 2. And now you can decide how these 2 participants, the first one should be role 1, the second one should be role 2. That's one way how you can customize the matching. Okay, now you have these roles. So if you do this, this is already all the thing that you have to do for the matching. So now people are assigned on the fly, red and green, player 1 and player 2. We can also see this if we go again to the game mode. I restart the game. I start again. I look here and you see now, okay, there's green players and there's red players, half and half. These figures in classics are standard. So we always have the red, the green, and then it comes a lot of, I think up to 30 roles are there in classics, which have these little figures, which can also be distinguished for red and green blind because red and green have different symbols here. And now you can start customizing your game according to the roles that you have. So again, let me go back to the editing mode. Let me just take out the rounds because otherwise we always have to repeat the game multiple times. That's something that we don't want to do at the moment. So I took out the rounds, as you can see. And now what you can do is you can make these decisions showing only for certain roles or for certain groups or for certain treatments. So how can you do that? There's options where you can select it just here with the menu, but I would always prefer going to the display conditions. So you click on the display condition, and for example, you say role. Oh, and you see, let's make it bigger. Role is equal to 1. So in PHP, you always have to state $, saying that's a variable. Role is the subject variable which is predefined in classics and tells you about your role. Equal to means it's a comparison. Equal to 1 means, okay, this is now shown for role 1. You click here, it's automatically saved. So let's go back to the lecture mode. Let's restart the game. And now you see the red players still have it and the green players have no input field. Okay, so you can customize everything according to roles or the treatments or whatever you want. Okay, so an example that we had, for example, last week, and I could just let me jump to already a programmed game, which is then easier to show. We have some games where you just have different information that you want to give to people. So different treatments. So if we look here at the game, that's the wrong game. just switch. We have it here. Sorry. Now we have it. Yes. Okay. So there's two treatments, as you can see. And there is two. Let's go get rid of the German version for a second. The English version is enough here. Two different texts that are shown to people. So this text is shown only in treatment 1, and this text is shown only in treatment 2. The rest of the game is completely the same. People have to make a certain decision. Okay. What you can do then, when it comes to the result, and this is the field down here, you can count the people by treatment. So you can make class X differentiate between the two treatments. How does this look like? Let's just have a brief look at the game, the recording equivalence. If you look at all the results, half of the people got this little text, and half of the people got this little text. And then you see the results depending on which of the treatments they have been assigned. So that is one of the easiest standard features that you can use these treatments for. Assign people different treatments, give them, for example, different text features or different text blocks, and then make these things accordingly. Okay, good. This was a very brief introduction in some of the elements that we have. I would like to continue in the following way. If you have to rush away, no problems. We do official closing here. The next step, I would just show you quickly how we program an ultimatum game. And then you can do this on your own, and we will be here for questions and answers. I know this is a lot of information. I know this is a little bit more advanced than the workshop last week. I think I tried to show you the most important features, which I told you the most important feature is this little info box that you can always look up in the documentation what this is all about, because you have a lot of options here. But just start with a simple game, copy it, modify it a little bit. This is kind of the way how you can approach these things. So that's maybe the last thing that I want to show you here is if you have, for example, here are all the ready-made games. You see something like an ultimatum game here. Here's always a copy button. So you can always just directly copy this ultimatum game and play a little bit around with it. See a little bit how this is programmed. Okay, as a last step now, I will just show you how doable it is to program a simple ultimatum game and to get some interaction. So let's do this right from the scratch. So I do a new game. I call it my ultimatum game. And I save it. That's all I have to do. I have my two first stages. In the first stage, I want to have the proposer who makes an offer. In the second stage, I want the responder. And in the third stage, I want to have the result. So that's a very simple type of a game. For assignment and matching, I can do complex matching. I can do also role and group. That doesn't matter. So I will have two roles, proposer and responder, group size of 2. So a proposer is always paired with one responder. It's the same setting that I just did in the previous game. So I just set up my matching first. Okay, so in the first stage, the proposer makes a decision. So the responder doesn't make a decision. So what I can do, I choose here only role 1, or I do it in a more general way with the display condition. So if role is equal to 1, I want to show this input field. Now the input field is still a button choice. We want, for example, a numeric input field, which we can change here. So we put it to a numeric one and say how much of 10 euro you want to give to the other player. something like this. We call it amount sent or something, amount sent. I can here set again a lot of things. The thing that I normally did is minimum maximum, which is something between 0 and 10. I can say if I want decimal places or not. I can give it a unit and give it a default, for example. Okay, does this look good? Yeah, let's check. So I have here my ultimatum game. I select it. I start it. And I have a look at the test player. The green player, as I want it, is empty, and the red player, you see, has this numeric input field. How much of 10 euro you want to give to the other player, and I can submit 5 euros, for example. So this is already working. For the green player, I just maybe add a text box here. Only for row 2, and I say, sorry, no decision to make, or whatever you want. Okay, that's the red player. Stage 1, start button is already okay. Next stage, the responder stage. So there is still from this predefined game, this single multiple choice thing that I don't need, so I delete it. And I have an empty screen. One thing that I have to define for the lecturer, and that's the only thing for them, is do I want a start button or do I want an automatic start? A start button would mean the lecturer has to click. So first all the proposers make the decision, then all the responders make the decision, and then you do the result stage in the next step. Or you can say I want an automatic start, and that's the thing that we want to look for now, automatic start. That once the proposer has done the decision, they automatically forward it to the next stage. Again, there's a lot of settings that you can change. The most important one, that's also something that people who use Setri know, is should we forward if possible? So if one player is finished, or should we wait for the others in the group? And as we are here in a game that we all want to wait for each other, they play in these little groups of 2 players. We always wait for the others in the group. Now in this stage, this is the only thing that I have to set up here. It's the stage for the responder. So again, I need an input element. Okay, I have an input element. I make my first input field. Standard is always numeric input field. In this case, for the responder, I want buttons. I want accept and reject. The responder can say, I want to accept or reject. So we do buttons, and we call it acceptance. Okay, do you want to accept the offer of X? We have to fill in the X in a minute. Then I can add 2 possible answers. Accept or reject. If I accept, this is the value 1. If I reject, if I'm clever, I put this already to 0. Then I can throw it directly into my regressions if I want. Okay, that's all that I need for the green player. So this one would be, no, role is equal to 2, the green player. Again, I will make a text box for the first player that he gets some information. Oh, sorry, not your decision. And this is only shown to the first player. How does this look like? Let's test. So let me start the game. Okay, the red player has this little thing that we saw before. And the green player has nothing. Okay, I enter here the 5. And now the red player gets, sorry, not your decision. And okay, we have many people in here, so it's maybe a different green player who is open now. The green player now has the field where he can accept or reject. Okay, to show you this, I have to do one thing. At the moment, you're all still logged in here in ClassX. So there's 17 people and one of the green players, which I cannot test. So if I want to do quiet testing, what I can do, I can go here to the course data and log you all out. So I don't want to be mean. No, I just do quiet testing. So now everyone should have been logged out, including me. No. So I'm also logging out and logging in again. But the good thing is now I can be sure, if I restart the game, that there is no one left in this game now. That's something you will rarely use, but for me it's now nice because then I can now open my 2 players and I can really test with only these 2 players. Okay, I can again start it. Now you see green player empty, red player has this. And then the green player gets the right message. Okay, do you want to accept the offer of X? And then the player clicks accept or reject. Okay, good. Last step is now we need to transfer these values. So we have here the variable amount sent. And we have to get this to the green player. So important is subject variables are always stored for each player individually. So if you want to tell another player what the first player has done, you have to transfer this information from one player to each other. I think in set-tree is the find function. In ClassX, and this is now where we add a little program. It's called find variable partners. Okay, if you're not sure, again, use the info button. And for the info button, you will see there's a lot of variables, functions that you can use. And you can see here the first function that you need is find variable partner. You can specify a variable name and maybe even other more advanced options, but that's not what we need. No. So the problem is that role 2 doesn't know what role 1 is doing. So we have to find this value. So amount sent is only stored for player 1, not for player 2. So for player 2, we have to find the variable partner amount sent. So from the other player. Okay, so this is a function, for example, to retrieve the value of your partner. And you can, for example, use so-called if conditions, or if role is equal to 2. So if I'm player 2, I have to find the variable of my partner, and this variable of my partner is called amount sent. So now role 2 retrieves from role 1 its value, amount sent. And now I can put this value, amount sent, here. So amount sent. And as I said, in text boxes, I always have to finish a line with this point comma. So do you want to accept the offer of $amount sent point comma? For all this programming, it's standard PHP. You can use all functions of PHP. There's, I don't know, for example, if you want to calculate a random number, or if you want to compare values or whatever you want, you can use all these functions. And there is some defined functions for ClassX that also start with the $sign. That's a bit uncommon, but you find them all documented, as I said here. No, find the variable of the partner, find the group average, find the sum of the group, find if there has been cells or buys, and so on. So there's a lot of functions that are documented here. Most of the time, you will just find the variable of the partner. Okay, let's see if this works. That's our little first code. 2 things to the code. First of all, we have a syntax highlighter. So you see a little bit of the structure of your code is okay. If you make an error, for example, you forget certain things, you will see sometimes there's this little red cross showing. So this is an unfinished statement. So you see the red cross. This works for very basic syntax errors. So it helps you in the first steps of programming. Otherwise, if you see the program is not running, just double check your code if something is missing there. For most beginners, it's mainly this point comma at the end of each line. For the rest, it's just like the good thing about PHP, and this was also the reason for the choice here, is that it's very, first of all, simply structured and not, you can be very lax when it comes to types of variables. So you can throw in these variables, text, numbers, digits, number of digits, whatever you want, and always PHP tries to make the best out of it. In other program languages, you have to be very careful about if this is an integer, is it a text or something. So you can be, PHP tries everything it can to make it work. If not, at some point, if the syntax is incorrect, then it has problems. But for the rest, you can just see a lot also in the documentation. Does it work? Hopefully. I restart the game. I have my test players open. I say, okay, I want to give 5 to the other. Do you want to accept the offer of 5? No, this is not this variable. So there was this find variable function taken from the other player and now provided to this. And now this player can accept or reject. And then we move on to the very last stage here. Now, there's the last stage is still, we don't need a start button here. We want the result here now. Now we want to see the result of these decisions. So for example, what we can use now, we have accept, reject, and we have the value chosen. So we can, for example, use a bubble chart. Result bubble. One is on the x-axis, we want the amount sent, and on the y-axis, we want the acceptance. The amount sent can vary between 0 and 10. I label it amount sent. The acceptance can vary between 0 and 1. Acceptance, yes or no. Something like this. And let us see if this works. So we have done our decision. I try to display the results. And down here, I see the little bubble. So there was an amount of 5 was sent, and 0 means it was not accepted. So it's maybe not the best way to display these results, but it's the easiest and most intuitive way. And the last step that you would need is now to also program some feedback for both. So this feedback, again, would mean the most important thing is program code. Again, now for the role 1 player. So always to keep in mind, what do these players know? So role 1 knows what amount he or she has sent, but role 1 does not know how the other decided, because this is a decision of player 2, role 2. Player 2 now knows everything. Player 2 got the information here in the previous stage, the amount sent, and he decided on accept or not. So he knows acceptance and he knows amount sent. So the thing that I have to add, if row is row, in this case, role 1, then I have to add find variable partner. And it was, I think, called acceptance. So now I have to do the other way around. Retrieve from the other player if he or she accepted. And then, now let me just add a text box. No? So amount sent, acceptance, acceptance. You could do much nicer things. No, you can, I don't know, if acceptance is equal to 1, then write a nice sentence, or display certain boxes only if acceptance is 1. So you can customize the feedback. I did just a very basic amount of feedback now. Not very user-friendly. I restart the game. I just tested. Okay, the other player here, 4, now I want to accept the offer of 4. Okay, this game now, you see 2 or 3 players decided, so somehow someone of you logged in again, so we have a 3rd player. I display the results now. The offer was 4, it was accepted, 4-1. And you see amount sent was 4, acceptance was 1. And here we have some error in the code because we see acceptance is still undefined. So we have to go back and check, maybe I spelled it out. I misspelled it. And I go back and I check it again. And then I test it again. So this is kind of the main structure that you always have. So you go here, you have these 2 players that you have, and you send information between them. And always keep in mind, that's why I highlight this so much. Subjects table is for a single player, globals table is for all of the players. And a subject only knows what a subject has in its own subject table. Last comment, you can also see the data. So in the data menu, you can first of all show the data. Then you see them here, 4 and 1. In live, it's not, that's just a selection of some data. You see that ClassX automatically stores the decision times. But the more common thing is you download it as an Excel file. And you open it with Excel. And there you find all the data that you collected. And let me just switch the screen to show you this. So this will be the Excel file. In the Excel file, you have different tabs down here. You see the players. They have been my 2 test players, which I can see that they have this external ID 999. That's my 2 test players. You see IP addresses being stored, but in an encrypted way. So you see my 2 test players, they come from the same IP, and the other players come from some different IPs. You see their subject ID, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You see their player ID, that's unique in ClassX. And you see their run ID, so that's the session that we are in. Here in the decision table, you can find the decisions made. Again, run, player ID, round, the variables that we created, 4 and 1, when the decision was taken, and also the decision time that in seconds that was used, group, role, and treatment, if they are set. Here you see there's another player which got feedback. So what ClassX always does, if there's an uneven number of players, there were 3 players in the game, then ClassX gives feedback. So from my group, there was another player in group 3, which was alone. And this player also gets some feedback. Kind of ClassX doubles feedback and takes the feedback from the first player. And that's what you see in this little line. Globals table, there have been no global variables. Matching shows you who has been matched with whom. Contract tables is also not important here. Payoffs is if you pay out people, then you will see it here. And then the stage history tells you in which stages of the game the players have been and which of them they have completed. That's if you want to analyze why people drop out and all these kind of things. Okay, we switch back here. That's also all on the slides. Last comments on these variables, and then we really have to close as we're heavily running out of time. First of all, globals and subjects use the same namespace, so you can overwrite them. That's one thing to be careful. Global variables are written first, and they are always available for all players in this moment of time. And subject variables are only specific to the player. Okay, good. So that was a lot of information, a lot to digest. I would say we close here, we stop here, and just give it a try. Try it out, copy games, program your own games. And for the rest, Florian and I are still here, happy to take any more specific questions. Maybe if you have already a project idea in mind, some special things that your design may require. And if not, we have this topic workshop next week, and also feel free to leave now at any time. If you have any specific questions, we're happy to take them. Thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks for joining from all over the world. That's really a pleasure seeing so many people. And I hope this effort continues and we can help a little bit with strengthening our online teaching during this pandemic. Stay all healthy, stay all good, and happy to take your questions. Is there anything, Florian, from the chat that I could comment on, or?
There has been one question about a comparison of classics and Z-tree regarding plots. If you scroll up, you will find it at 451. Question number 4 that was asked there. Is there something similar to plot boxes as in Z-tree that you can also use as an input method? I'm not quite sure about the comparison to Z-tree.
So Z-tree has plot boxes that you can use to show some nice graphs. That's something that you can do in Classics. We have certain types of plugins that you can activate. Let me show you to this. So here, if you go to the game settings, down here, you see additional libraries. And there is something like Plotly, for example, or HighCharts are two libraries that are quite standard where you can plot things with. These libraries are all based on JavaScript, and JavaScript also allows for input. So you can customize these things also in a way that allow for input of data. So for example, if you click on that point of the graph, this will happen. This will be just a brief sketch how this way works. So you can do this, plot these graphs here, or just, for example, you can also embed pictures and just then with JavaScript specify, if you click on that picture, this happens, store this variable. Or if you click on that picture, click on the other action will happen. This is all based on JavaScript. The only thing that you have to do in the end, then write these variables or these decisions that people took then to the normal PHP variables. Because all variables or decisions are stored in PHP. The reason for this is JavaScript is can easily be manipulated on the front end, so by the user, and PHP cannot so easily because it's running on the server side. So to make the data kind of unique and safe, that's why we store them in PHP. If you do this more as I said, these more interactive types of screens where you click and something happens, for these one you can add a little bit of JavaScript. JavaScript is also documented in the documentation. And as I just saw that there was a question about tutorials. So the Classics documentation itself has this little tutorial that we kind of went through how to develop an ultimatum game. It has within the documentation from time to time you find little videos where things are explained, how to start a game in Classics, how to use the overview mode. So for example, if you go to run the ready-made games, you will see little videos which are embedded in the documentation. But that's something that we also will work on because it's just realizing from doing this workshop for the first time online. It's a lot of information, it's a lot of bits and pieces. So it really calls for kind of little videos that we should add. But I think the right place for this would be the documentation, which is very extensive already. So if you download the PDF, here, I just forgot how many pages it were. You can download completely as PDFs. 108 pages already. So it's very extensive in all its documentation. But this is like realizing that showing is something that's also quite useful. while I just was clicking through the game, I thought this would maybe be a good thing in order to have a big webinar to split it up in little videos and just publish them from time to time, where, I don't know, one of the Classics team members programs a game and you can just, and explains what he or she is doing. And not to forget it, you can always learn also from other games. Just take a game like this, copy it, and modify it, play around. I think this play approach is always so very highlighted because we have the central architecture, so that you can always just take a standard game. If you say, well, I don't know, I want an ultimatum game, but I want to change a little thing that I always use in this lecture, the easiest thing that I would always take was I would just look here, see, okay, standard games, there's an ultimatum game somewhere. I would copy it, give it a name, and then I have everything already in a nice way programmed here. And I just change it a little bit according to the needs. I think that's maybe if you have a first approach to how to use Classics and how to get acquainted with all these elements here.
Marcus, talking about playing around with games, do you probably want to show the diagnosis tool for a second? Because it's, in my opinion, one of the most helpful tools to check where a bug in your game might have occurred. And especially if you try out things, you can see where a variable was failed to be generated, for example.
Very good point. Thanks, Florian. So as I told, if you look at this code, you click at it, you see that the highlight editor, it looks already quite good. And you see, okay, all the standard is like criteria of a programming language is met. You can further analyze, okay, what variables do I have? How are they written? If you go to the lecture mode, now let's play the real ultimatum game and not the one that we just programmed. So we have the real font. You see it's a little bit nicer with all the text and everything, but it's in the end, it's the same game that we played. If you click here on this little diagnosis tool, which looks like the stethoscope of a doctor, then here on the right, it opens a little screen which shows you all the variables that are written during the game in live. So you see we have our two test players with these two numbers, 290663 and 290662. And you can look what's written for them, and you can look what is written globally. There's a lot of standard variables which are written, like maximum that you can win in a game, currency symbols, language, current round. And it's specific to this game is the endowment of 10, and if you want a histogram or not. These are the globals. For the subjects, we see the ID. This is this unique ID, the role, the treatment, the group, round, the subject ID. Sign ID is something that is used only for trading, and a ticket, if this is set. And you see that each subject always inherits all the globals. So it also has all the globals as its potential values. If you now make a decision, I don't know, I keep 4, the other gets 6, I submit this decision. I go back. So this was now the player 663. I go to the player 663. Then I can see also the variables that have been stored now. Behalten, German for keep, and send 6. So I see the 4 and the 6. I see that they have been stored and calculated correctly. So I can always double check here, seeing how the values go. Then I do accept or reject. So I accept, for example. And now if I go to the other player, 2262, I see, okay, accepted is 1. There's some other variables that is not there written to set to -1. That's some calculations in the background. But I can check all the values. As Florian put it, it's very helpful to spot programming errors or miscalculations or things that may go wrong. And you can always just close it by clicking on close or just clicking on the symbol again. It goes away, and you can always look a little bit behind the scenes. That's a very important feature. Is there anything else from the chat? Or anything else in this group here?
Marcus, I have a question.
Yes. Hi.
So first of all, I mean, this is absolutely great. Thank you very much for doing this. Fantastic. I have a question. Last time you said that, which I found very useful, when you split up people in pairs, for instance, and you have an uneven number of participants, then it will just reuse one of the decisions, and that made a lot of sense. And I was just wondering, in the case of fixed matching, what how would it deal with that kind of problem? Or if there are dropouts, would it then stop, or what would happen?
No, so the thing it does is, we talked about this find variable partner function. This is this function here, that one player always looks for the information of the other player. In the ultimatum game, for example, the responder has to be informed about the decision of the proposer, which is done with this find variable partner. This find variable partner has a lot of mechanics behind it, which try to really find something. So first of all, it tries to find the variable of the actual partner. If the actual partner is not existing at all, or has dropped, and this can always happen within the game, that's something that can happen a lot. Assume a big lecture of people, someone goes to the toilet, runs out of battery, the proposer is gone, has never made a decision. ClassX then tries next step to find the proposal of another player in the room and just gives it to this person. This is not stored as a own decision. It's just when you looked at the Excel sheet, you saw there was this additional line feedback from other player or something, saying that this was taken from like this observation was kind of doubled. If you don't want that, you can also add a parameter here saying, in the case of no decision, let's make it a bit bigger. I can add a third parameter saying, in the case if I don't find my partner anymore, I just want to give back 0, for example. So I could also, for example, say, let's assume I don't want decisions to be doubled. I just want, if the partner is gone, I want the Nash decision, and the Nash decision would be like sending nothing, sending 0. I could also do this, 0 here. So I could customize it in any way that I want, or I can say, I don't know, I want a random number, a random 0, 10. So now it gives back to this lonely responder a number between 0 and 10 randomly. So this is the different layers that are there, all of the goal to give feedback at any however it's like this is possible. So first layer is always find someone else, but you can always override this and say, please give him something, or you can even be more creative and write some if conditions. If this is the decision, then do this, give him back this. But this problem becomes in these games, so in these very simple games, it's not so problematic. If you have games with different steps, it becomes a little bit more complex, because then you have a lot of these find variable here and there. So it's always good kind of to define a default. Normally we use the Nash solution because this is kind of the most objective one to say. Or you see it also here. Now, in addition, I also put something there. If send is equal to null, null is a placeholder for no value, then send is equal to 0. So for if even this thing with because I haven't defined any default here. If for some reason this person doesn't find a partner anymore, then it just sets again send to 0. That's another way how to put it. So it really tries to give feedback at any cost possible. This is something that really goes against our data like research attitude in this, but this is it serves a different purpose. But if you use it for research, it deals with these data not as data points. That's very important. It doesn't create any data points that are then stored in the data file, and you can then not distinguish, is this real data or is this made up data? So ClassX is, even if it has this teaching focus, still has this research background. So it's very clear on this research ethics here.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. Just a quick follow-up question. If there are multiple rounds, then in each round it would just do it in the same way, I guess. And
exactly. So you see here in this find variable partner thing, there's this variable round. Again, the default is take it. So what ClassX always tries is it tries to take it from the current round that we are in. So the default is always the current round. If you, for example, want to take it not from the current, but from the previous round, you can just say round -1. And then it now takes it from the previous round. For example, you have games, I don't know, you want to show, let's take these proposer responder games where the history of previous play is influencing the next round, and you want to show the history of decisions, then you could, for example, do it with this. So this find variable partner is very flexible. You can do a lot of like looking back and forth in time to other people. If I just open this, like again, I could click here. I see there's I can change the variable name, the round selected. So which is the round? I can select partner role. So which is the which maybe if I have multiple partners, partner 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can also select this. And down there, okay, that's now not visible due to the. And the last parameter is this no decision thing. If I don't find a decision, should I take the 0 or I take the Nash or whatever? So I can look back in time. I can look to other part. I don't know if I have roll 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I can also then have more complex function, for example, looking at the group level, finding the group average. That's something maybe you want to use for contribution games. You want to find the group average, or even more related, find the group sum. That would be for a public goods game. You have the contributions, you find all the contributions of all people, and you see again, it has some parameters. Again, the round is always a parameter. And here, for example, it has a parameter including own, which you can set to true or false. So you can say there is public goods game that I want the sum taken over all people, or I want the sum taken over all but myself. And then this list continues. And the same thing is also then for the lecturer on the other side. So because the participant is somehow limited in what he or she can do, but the lecturer also has a lot of functions. So to, for example, get averages, then ClassX gives me back all the averages for all the people. And you can also get average, get the median, get the any type of calculation that you want. The basic structure is always the variable name, that you can speak to this variable, and then the round. And here you see it again. If you don't specify a round, you can just, it always takes the current round. So these PHP functions are always based on the idea you only have to add parameters if you want to change them. So all these parameters will have an equal sign and a specific thing after that mean they are default values. So you see the variable name you have to specify. It doesn't have a default, but the round selected has a default, which is the current round. So if you can use this function with just one parameter, then it takes from the current round. If you use it with 2 parameters, you can choose the round that you want. And then you have all these types of retrieving functions. So on the global side, you can do also a lot of calculations. You can, for example, get all the values. For example, beauty contest game. You could take all the values, calculate 2/3 of the average, and then detect who's the winner, who's closest to that number, and then store this as a global variable, and everyone knows this is the winner now. Because there's something that you could not do on the participant side, because then the participant would have to retrieve the numbers. That's a bit like inefficient if each participant retrieves all the numbers from all other players and you do the calculus. Then on the participant side, you would do it, I don't know, in the big lectures 500 times, the same calculus. So for all these group calculus, big things that you do, it's always better to put them on the lecturer side, do them once. And then just the participants they can always access these global variables. So they get the result of this calculation, and then you do something with that. I don't know, if winner is equal to 1, then, or if winner is equal to your own player number, then you get the message, you are the winner. If this is not the case, you are not the winner. Something like this. So this is a little bit this distinction between globals and subject variables. But very similar to set tree in a way. Good. Okay. If there's no more questions, as I said, we're always open for questions, for discussions, we have the forum documentation, and we're also approachable via email. So feel free. Also, if you feel the need that, I don't know, you have an institution where you say that would be more interesting for some more people, we can always, like, that's the luxury of these times, that we can always say, I don't know, we have 10 people at the faculty who are interested in that, like, can we do another little webinar just for ourselves? In these times, that's all possible with very low costs, because we have this possibility of Zoom meetings. And I think we can then close here. I thank you all. I stopped the recording.